The massive doors of the Galactic Council chamber opened with a soft hiss. Ambassador Han Wu walked through them, his black diplomatic uniform crisp and formal. His footsteps echoed in the enormous room as he made his way to the human delegation's assigned seat. Above him, the domed ceiling showed the stars of 1,000 worlds, each one representing a member species of the Galactic Alliance. Han Wu had been Earth's representative for only 6 months. Humanity was still the newest member of the Council, having been discovered just 2 years ago when their radio signals finally reached galactic monitoring stations. The other species had been exploring space for thousands of years. Humans were like children who had just learned to walk. The chamber was already filling with delegates from across the galaxy. The Saurians slithered into their section, their reptilian bodies gleaming under the artificial lights. Their scales shifted from green to blue as they communicated through color changes. The Catharans buzzed in their area, their insect-like bodies moving in perfect coordination. They thought as one mind, sharing thoughts instantly across their entire species. Han Wu nodded politely to the other delegates as they settled into their seats. He still felt out of place among these ancient civilizations. Some of these species had been traveling between stars when humans were still living in caves. The session began when Council Speaker Morthak called for order. The tall, gray-skinned Vorthon stood at the center podium, his forearms gesturing for silence. His species had founded the Galactic Alliance 8,000 years ago. They were known for their fairness and wisdom. Today we discuss the placement of our newest members in the coming conflict, Speaker Morthak announced. His voice was translated instantly into every language in the chamber. The Valorian Empire grows more aggressive each day. They have rejected all peace offers. War seems unavoidable. Han Wu felt his stomach tighten. He had hoped humanity could avoid getting involved in galactic conflicts so soon. Earth had barely figured out how to travel to other star systems. Now they were being asked to help fight a war against an empire that controlled hundreds of worlds. Delegate Veltara of the Saurians rose from her seat. Her scales had turned a deep purple, indicating serious thought. Speaker, my people have completed our study of human behavior and capabilities. We request permission to present our findings. Granted, Speaker Morthak replied. Veltara activated a holographic display that showed images of Earth. Cities, governments, armies, and peaceful protests appeared in the air above the delegates. For the past 2 years, we have observed human civilization closely. Our conclusion is clear. Humans are a naturally peaceful species. Murmurs of interest rippled through the chamber. Han Wu leaned forward, curious about what the aliens had learned about his own people. Look at their recent history, Veltara continued. The display showed images of the United Nations, peace treaties, and diplomatic meetings. In just the last century, humans have created numerous organizations dedicated to preventing war. They have written laws to limit conflict. They prefer talking to fighting. The hologram shifted to show economic agreements and trade deals. When humans disagree, they use economic pressure instead of military force. They create sanctions, not explosions. They build trade relationships to prevent conflicts. Delegate Quillenth of the Kitharans stood up next. When one Kitharan spoke, it was really their entire species speaking through that individual. Our analysis supports the Saurian findings. Humans show clear evolutionary development toward pacifism. The display now showed human peacekeeping forces and medical organizations. Their military units are primarily used for disaster relief and humanitarian missions. They send doctors to help their enemies. They feed populations of countries they disagree with. This is not the behavior of a warrior species. Han Wu wanted to object, but he knew the aliens were not entirely wrong. Modern humanity did prefer diplomacy to warfare. The images they showed were accurate. Earth had spent decades building international laws and peace organizations. Furthermore, Quillenth continued, humans have actively reduced their military capabilities over time. They have dismantled weapons, signed disarmament treaties, and converted military facilities to civilian use. They are moving away from violence, not toward it. Delegate Korthun of the crystal-based Zephyrians chimed in with a sound like wind through glass. Our psychic readings confirm these observations. Human thoughts focus on cooperation, building, and creating. They think about art and science more than conquest and domination. Speaker Morthach nodded thoughtfully. These findings are consistent with our own observations. Humans appear to be a diplomatic species that has evolved beyond primitive aggression. Han Wu finally stood up. With respect, honored delegates, I think you may be missing part of the picture. The chamber fell silent. All eyes turned to him. Han Wu felt the weight of representing his entire species. While it's true that modern humanity prefers peace, we maintain military forces for a reason. We understand that sometimes conflict cannot be avoided. Veltara's scales shifted to a dismissive yellow. Ambassador Han Wu, your military consists largely of peacekeepers and disaster response teams. Your weapons are outdated compared to galactic standards. Your largest conflicts in recent decades have been police actions, not wars. That may be true, Han Wu admitted, but the evidence is overwhelming, Quill Nth interrupted. Humans are ideally suited for non-combat roles in the coming war. Medical support, supply logistics, refugee assistance, and diplomatic outreach. These are areas where your people can contribute without being placed in danger. Other delegates began nodding in agreement. The decision seemed to be forming without further discussion. Han Wu realized that the council had already made up their minds before the session began. Speaker Morthach raised his forearms for attention. Based on the comprehensive studies presented, this council assigns humanity to support roles in the upcoming conflict with the Valorian Empire. Human forces will handle medical operations, supply chain management, and refugee processing. They will not be assigned to combat duties. This decision protects our newest members while utilizing their natural diplomatic and humanitarian strengths, added Veltara. Han Wu sat down slowly, feeling frustrated but unsure how to argue. The aliens had studied humanity carefully. Their observations were not wrong, just incomplete. Modern humans did prefer peace. They had built a civilization around avoiding war. As the session continued with discussions of military strategy and resource allocation, Han Wu noticed movement in the gallery above. Observers from various species watched the proceedings from the upper levels. Most were diplomats, researchers, and journalists. But one figure caught his attention. An older, human man sat alone in the back row of the human observation section. He wore a simple gray jacket and dark pants. Nothing marked him as military, but something about the way he sat, the way he held his shoulders, made Han Wu think of soldiers he had known. The man's face was weathered and lined with age. His hair was white, but his eyes were sharp and alert. He watched the proceedings with the focused attention of someone who understood strategy and conflict. When the delegates spoke about human pacifism, the old man's expression remained neutral, but Han Wu noticed his hands clench slightly. As the session ended and delegates began filing out, Han Wu looked up at the gallery again. The old man was still there, now staring directly at him. Their eyes met for a moment across the vast chamber. In that brief contact, Han Wu saw something that made him uncomfortable. It was not anger or disagreement. It was the look of someone who knew things that others did not. Someone who had seen things that others had not. The man stood up slowly and walked toward the exit. As he passed under one of the chamber's lights, Han Wu caught a glimpse of something on the man's jacket. A small pin or metal. Too distant to see clearly, but it glinted like metal worn smooth by time. Han Wu gathered his papers and prepared to leave. The council had made its decision about humanity's role in the war. But something about that old man in the gallery made him think the aliens might have missed something important in their studies. Something that might matter very much in the days to come. 3 months had passed since the Galactic Council assigned humanity to support roles in the war against the Valorian Empire. Ambassador Han Wu sat in his quarters aboard Station Nexus Prime, reading reports that made his blood run cold. The war was going badly. Very badly. The Valorians were not like any enemy the Galactic Alliance had faced before. Most conflicts between civilized species followed certain rules. Conquered populations were allowed to surrender. Civilians were protected. Prisoners were treated with basic dignity. The Valorians followed none of these rules. Han Wu's computer screen displayed the latest intelligence reports. 12 star systems had fallen to Valorian forces in just 3 months. Entire planets had been stripped of resources and left to die. Populations that resisted were not simply defeated. They were made into examples. A soft chime indicated someone was requesting entry to his quarters. Han Wu looked up to see Dr. Mi Young standing in his doorway. The young Korean woman looked exhausted. Dark circles ringed her eyes, and her medical uniform was wrinkled from long hours treating refugees. "Ambassador, do you have a moment?" she asked quietly. "Of course, doctor. Please sit down." Han Wu gestured to a chair across from his desk. "How are the refugee medical operations going?" Mi Young sat down heavily and rubbed her temples. "That's what I need to talk to you about. The stories we're hearing from the survivors. Han Wu, these Valorians are not just winning battles, they're committing atrocities." She pulled out a datapad and showed him medical records. "I've treated over 3,000 refugees in the past month. The injuries we're seeing aren't from normal warfare. They're from torture. Systematic torture." Han Wu studied the records. Even though he was not a doctor, he could see that the injuries were deliberately inflicted. Burns in specific patterns, broken bones that had been repeatedly rebroken, psychological trauma that went far beyond normal combat stress. "The Valorians don't just defeat their enemies," Mi Young continued. "They break them, physically and mentally. They want other species to surrender without fighting, so they make examples of anyone who resists." "What about the children?" Han Wu asked, though he dreaded the answer. Mi Young's face darkened. "That's the worst part. They don't spare children. In fact, they seem to target families specifically. They know that destroying families breaks the will of entire populations." A communication alert interrupted their conversation. Han Wu activated his wall screen to see an urgent message from the council chambers. "Emergency session called. All delegates report immediately." Han Wu and Mi Young made their way to the council chambers together. The corridors of Nexus Prime buzzed with activity. Delegates from dozens of species hurried toward the emergency session. The usual calm atmosphere of the station had been replaced by barely controlled panic. In the council chambers, Speaker Morthak looked older than Han Wu had ever seen him. The tall Vorthon's gray skin had turned almost white, and his 4 arms trembled slightly as he called for order. "Fellow delegates, we have received devastating news from the Kepler 442 system," Speaker Morthak announced. "Fleet Commander Kexathulan will provide the report." A massive Saurian stepped forward to the central podium. Commander Kexathulan's scales were deep red, indicating extreme distress. His usually steady voice shook as he spoke. "The Valorian 3rd. Fleet attacked the civilian station at Kepler 442 6 hours ago. The station housed 50,000 refugees from previously conquered systems. It was clearly marked as a non-military facility under galactic protection laws." The chamber fell silent. Even the normally buzzing Kitharans stopped their constant communication. "The Valorians did not attempt to capture the station," Kexathulan continued. "They boarded it with ground forces. What they did to the civilians—" The commander paused, struggling to maintain his composure. "They broadcasted it across all communication channels as psychological warfare." Han Wu felt sick. He could see other delegates turning pale or displaying their species' equivalent of horror. The Valorians were not just committing atrocities, they were advertising them. "How many survivors?" asked Delegate Veltara, her scales now completely white. "None from the general population," Kexathulan replied. "However, they kept approximately 800 individuals alive as prisoners. This includes 300 human medical staff who were treating refugees at the station." Han Wu's blood turned to ice. 300 humans were now in Valorian hands. He thought of Dr. Mi Young and her colleagues who had volunteered to help refugees. People just like them were now prisoners of an enemy that used torture as a weapon. "The Valorians have sent a message," Kexathulan continued. "They will execute 10 prisoners every day until the Galactic Alliance surrenders unconditionally. They began the executions immediately after their broadcast." Chaos erupted in the chamber. Delegates shouted questions and demands. Some called for immediate military action. Others suggested evacuation of all remaining civilian facilities. The Kitharans' buzzing became so loud it hurt to listen to. Speaker Morthak raised his arms for silence, but it took several minutes for order to return. When the chamber finally quieted, the desperation was visible on every face. "What are our military options?" asked Delegate Quillenth. Commander Kexathulan's scales shifted to a defeated brown. "Limited. The Valorians have superior numbers and Technology. Our fleets are designed for defense and peacekeeping. Theirs are built for conquest and destruction. Every direct engagement has resulted in heavy losses for Alliance forces. What about a rescue mission for the prisoners? Han Wu asked. Impossible, Kex Thulin replied. The station is now a Valorian military fortress. It would take our entire remaining fleet to assault it, and we would likely lose most of our ships in the attempt. Even if successful, the prisoners would probably be executed before we could reach them. The chamber fell into grim silence. Han Wu looked around at the faces of beings from across the galaxy and saw only despair. These species had built a civilization based on cooperation and peaceful coexistence. They were not prepared for an enemy that viewed cruelty as a military strategy. Perhaps, Delegate Veltara said hesitantly, we should consider the human diplomatic expertise. Ambassador Han Wu, could your people negotiate some kind of prisoner exchange? All eyes turned to Han Wu. He felt the weight of 300 human lives on his shoulders. I can contact Earth. Perhaps our diplomatic corps could establish communication with the Valorians. As delegates began discussing the slim possibility of negotiation, Han Wu noticed movement in the gallery above. The same old man from 3 months ago was there again, the mysterious figure in the gray jacket who carried himself like a soldier. This time, Han Wu paid more attention to him. The man's face was hard as stone as he listened to the reports of torture and execution. His hands were clenched into fists, and something dangerous flickered in his eyes. When Delegate Veltara suggested using human diplomatic skills, the old man's expression changed. It was not hope or agreement. It was something much darker. The look of someone who had heard enough. Han Wu watched as the man slowly stood up in the gallery. Other observers turned to look at him, sensing something was about to happen. The chamber's discussions began to quiet as attention shifted upward. The old man stepped forward to the gallery railing. His voice, when he spoke, was not loud, but it carried clearly through the chamber's acoustics. Ma'am, he said, looking directly at Delegate Veltara, with all due respect, you've fundamentally misunderstood what we are. Security guards began moving toward the gallery, but Han Wu held up his hand to stop them. Something told him this moment was important. We don't avoid conflict because we're weak, the old man continued, his voice growing stronger. We avoid it because we're very, very good at it. The chamber fell completely silent. Every delegate, every observer, every security guard stopped to listen. You studied our peace treaties and our diplomatic organizations. Did you study why we needed them? Did you count our wars before we learned to control ourselves? Han Wu felt something shift in the chamber's atmosphere. The old man's words carried a weight that made everyone uneasy. You looked at our humanitarian missions and peacekeeping forces. Did you look at what we did to ourselves when we had no rules? Did you see what we accomplished with sticks and stones, then gunpowder, then split atoms? The old man's eyes swept across the chamber, meeting the gaze of alien delegates who had begun to look uncertain. We created laws of war because without them we have no limits. We built international cooperation because we learned what happens when we don't. As the old man's words echoed in the silent chamber, Han Wu realized that everything was about to change. The aliens had studied humanity's peaceful nature, but they had missed the reason behind it. They had seen the civilization humans had built to control their darker impulses, but they had not understood what those impulses were capable of when unleashed. Looking at the old man's face, Han Wu suddenly understood that 300 human prisoners in Valorian hands might have just changed everything. The silence in the Galactic Council chamber stretched like a taut wire. Every alien delegate stared up at the old human man in the gallery. His words hung in the air, heavy with implications that none of them fully understood yet. Ambassador Han Wu felt his heart racing. He recognized the tone in the old man's voice. It was the same tone his grandfather had used when talking about the Korean War. Quiet, controlled, but carrying the weight of terrible knowledge. Security Chief Yothmar, a tall, blue-skinned Altarian, stepped toward the gallery stairs. His hand moved toward his weapon, but Han Wu quickly stood up. "Wait," Han Wu called out. "Let him speak." The old man looked down at Han Wu and nodded slightly as if approving of the decision. Then he turned his attention back to the alien delegates below. "My name is Tai Ho," the old man said. His voice was steady and calm. "I'm 73 years old. I've been watching these proceedings for months, listening to your analysis of my species." Delegate Veltara's scales had shifted to a nervous green. "Sir, this is a closed session. Observers are not permitted to— You said humans avoid conflict. Tejo continued, ignoring the interruption. You're not wrong. We do avoid it. But you've completely misunderstood why. Speaker Morthak gestured for security to stand down. The ancient Vorthon seemed curious about what the human would say. Continue, Elder Tejo. Tejo placed his hands on the gallery railing. Hanwu could see old scars on the man's knuckles and what looked like a faded tattoo on his forearm. I served in 4 different wars, Tejo said. Korea, Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan, 47 years in the military, most of it in combat zones. I've seen what humans do when the rules break down. The chamber remained silent, but Hanwu noticed the alien delegates leaning forward slightly. Something in Tejo's voice commanded attention. You studied our peace treaties, Tejo continued. Good. But did you study the siege of Stalingrad? Did you read about Hiroshima? Did you learn about the Holocaust? Several delegates exchanged confused looks. These were names they had not encountered in their research. You looked at our humanitarian organizations. Did you also look at Unit 731? Did you study what happened at My Lai? Did you examine the rape of Nanking? Hanwu felt cold. He knew some of these references from history classes. They were not things humanity was proud of. We don't avoid war because we're naturally peaceful, Tejo said, his voice growing harder. We avoid war because we know exactly what we're capable of when we stop holding back. Delegate Quillanth spoke up, her insectoid voice carrying confusion. We have analyzed human combat capabilities. Your technology is primitive by galactic standards. Your armies are small. Our weapons are limited by treaties we made with ourselves, Tejo interrupted. Do you know why we banned chemical weapons? Not because we couldn't make them, because we used them so effectively that we scared ourselves. The old man's eyes swept across the chamber. Do you know why we banned biological weapons? Because we created diseases that could kill entire continents. Do you know why we banned nuclear weapons? Because we built enough of them to destroy our own planet 7 times over. A chill seemed to settle over the chamber. Even the normally active Kitharans had stopped their buzzing communication. You think we're weak, because we only fight small wars now, Tejo continued. Those aren't small wars. Those are wars where we're holding back. Wars where we follow rules. Wars where we're trying not to become monsters. Hanwu realized that every alien in the chamber was staring at Tejo. With growing alarm, the old man's words were reshaping everything they thought they knew about humanity. Let me tell you about human warfare, Tejo said. In World War II, we killed 60 million of our own species in 6 years. We turned entire cities into ash. We perfected the art of killing so thoroughly that we had to invent new words for what we did. Commander Kex Thulan's scales had turned completely white. That is impossible. No civilized species could— Civilized? Tejo laughed, but there was no humor in it. Commander, we did all of that before we even left our own planet. Before we had energy weapons or space travel or artificial intelligence, we did it with metal and explosives and our bare hands. The old man paused, letting his words sink in. The chamber was so quiet that Hanwu could hear the station's life support systems humming. You want to know why humans prefer diplomacy? Tejo asked. Because we've seen what happens when diplomacy fails. We've been on both sides of genocide. We've been the victims and the perpetrators. We've learned that talking is better than the alternative. Delegate Veltara's voice was barely a whisper. But your modern military forces, they're so small, so focused on peacekeeping. Our modern military forces are what we allow ourselves to have, Tejo replied. They're not designed to fight other humans anymore. They're designed to fight people who don't fight back. Pirates, terrorists, criminals. He leaned forward against the railing. But the Valorians aren't pirates or terrorists. They're an enemy that doesn't follow rules. They torture prisoners. They target civilians. They execute the helpless. Tejo's voice became deadly quiet. You've just given us permission to stop following rules too. Hanwu felt something shift in the chamber's atmosphere. It was like watching a dam develop a crack. Once it started, there would be no stopping what came next. Sir, Speaker Morthak said carefully, surely you cannot be suggesting— I'm not suggesting anything, Tejo interrupted. I'm telling you what's about to happen. Right now, Earth's government is receiving reports about 300 of our people being tortured and executed. They're hearing about children being murdered for psychological warfare. The old man straightened up, and suddenly he looked less like a frail elderly observer and more like what he really was, a soldier. You studied our peace organizations. Did you study our war plans? Did you look at what we keep in storage, just in case? Did you examine what happens when we decide that someone needs to stop existing? Security Chief Yothmar stepped forward. Elder Tejo, you're frightening the delegates. Good, Tejo replied. They should be frightened, not of us, but of what they've unleashed. The Valorians think they're warriors because they can torture civilians and execute prisoners. They're about to learn the difference between cruelty and warfare. Han Wu's communicator chimed with an urgent message. He glanced at it and felt his blood freeze. Earth Central Command was requesting immediate priority communication with all human diplomatic personnel. Ambassador Han Wu, Tejo called down to him. I think you're about to receive some interesting orders. As if summoned by his words, Han Wu's assistant hurried into the chamber and whispered urgently in his ear. The message was brief, but terrifying in its implications. Earth's military had been activated, not the peacekeeping forces or the humanitarian corps, the real military, the one they kept hidden away because they had hoped never to need it again. Han Wu looked up at Tejo, who was watching him with knowing eyes. How did you know? Han Wu asked. Because, Tejo replied, I helped write those protocols 40 years ago. I was there when we decided what would happen if someone ever hurt our people badly enough. The old man turned to address the chamber one final time. Delegates of the Galactic Alliance, you have a choice to make. You can step aside and let us handle the Valorian problem our way, or you can try to stop us. He paused, letting the implications sink in. But understand this. We spent centuries learning to control what we are. The Valorians just gave us a reason to remember what we used to be, and what we used to be was very, very good at making our enemies extinct. As Tejo turned and walked toward the gallery exit, every alien delegate sat in stunned silence. They had spent months studying humanity's peaceful nature, never realizing. They had been looking at a species that had deliberately chosen to restrain itself. Now that restraint was about to be removed, and none of them were prepared for what came next. The emergency communication came through at exactly 0347 station time. Ambassador Han Wu sat in his quarters, staring at the encrypted message that had just arrived from Earth. The words on his screen made his hands shake. Operation Never Again is authorized. All diplomatic protocols suspended. Military command assumes authority for human assets. Prepare for immediate fleet deployment. Han Wu had never heard of Operation Never Again. In 20 years of diplomatic service, he had never seen Earth's government authorize anything that bypassed diplomatic channels. But there it was, signed by the President, the Secretary of Defense, and someone called the Joint Chiefs of Staff. A second message appeared on his screen. This one was from Admiral Dong Jun of the Earth Defense Fleet. Han Wu recognized the name from military briefings, but had never expected to receive direct communication from him. Ambassador Han Wu, we arrive in 16 hours. Prepare the council for military consultation. The situation has changed. 16 hours. Han Wu looked at the timestamp and realized the Admiral's message had been sent 12 hours ago. That meant Earth's military fleet was already only 4 hours away from Nexus Prime. Han Wu quickly dressed and made his way to the medical bay where Dr. Mi Young was working the night shift. He found her treating a young Saurian refugee who had been injured in a Valorian attack on a mining colony. Mi Young, Han Wu said quietly, we need to talk. She looked up from her patient, saw the expression on his face, and immediately called for another doctor to take over. They stepped into a private office where Han Wu showed her the messages. What is Operation Never Again? She asked after, reading both communications. I don't know, Han Wu admitted, but I think we're about to find out. Mi Young was quiet for a moment, then pulled up her own communication system. I received orders too, she said. All human medical staff are to prepare biological containment protocols immediately. Full quarantine procedures. We're also being issued new medical supplies. She showed him the supply list. Han Wu was not a doctor, but even he could see that these were not normal medical supplies. The list included items for treating radiation exposure, chemical burns, and biological contamination. Han Wu, Mi Young said softly, what kind of war are we preparing to fight? Before he could answer, his communicator chimed with an urgent message from the council chambers. All delegates report immediately. Priority Alpha emergency session. The Ka. Council chamber was already packed when Han Wu and Mi Young arrived. Every delegate from every species was present, along with military commanders, security chiefs, and technical advisors. The atmosphere was tense with fear and confusion. Speaker Morthak stood at the central podium, his forearms trembling slightly. Fellow delegates, we have received disturbing reports from our monitoring stations. A large human fleet has entered our space and is approaching Nexus Prime. Murmurs of concern rippled through the chamber. Delegate Veltara's scales had turned a nervous yellow. How large is this fleet? Our intelligence suggested that Earth's space forces were minimal. Commander Kexathulan stepped forward with a data display. That intelligence appears to have been incorrect. Our sensors are detecting 47 vessels approaching at high speed. The ships are unusual. The holographic display showed images captured by long-range sensors. Han Wu stared at the ships and felt his blood run cold. These were not the peaceful exploration vessels or medical ships that Earth had been sending to the galaxy. These were warships, dark, angular, and built for one purpose only. The ships do not match any designs in our databases, Kexathulan continued. They appear to be heavily armed and armored. Their energy signatures suggest weapon systems we have never encountered. What are those names on the ships? Asked Delegate Quilenth. The display zoomed in on the hulls of several vessels. Han Wu could read the names painted in stark white. Letters UES Verdun, UES Stalingrad, UES Chosin, UES Normandy. Han Wu recognized those names from human history. They were battlefields. Famous battles where humans had fought with desperate courage against overwhelming odds. Someone had named these ships after the places where humanity had learned to win impossible wars. The lead vessel is requesting permission to dock, Commander Kexathulan reported. They identify themselves as the Earth Defense Fleet under Admiral Dong Jun. Speaker Morthak looked around the chamber helplessly. Do we have any choice but to grant permission? I don't think we ever had a choice, said a familiar voice from the gallery. All eyes turned upward to see Tae-ho standing at the railing again. This time, he was not alone. Several other humans stood with him, all wearing the same gray jackets, all carrying themselves with the same military bearing. Elder Tae-ho, Speaker Morthak called up, can you explain what is happening? What's happening, Tae-ho replied, is that you're about to see what humans do when someone hurts our people. The chamber's communications system crackled to life. A new voice filled the room, speaking with calm authority. Nexus Prime Control, this is Admiral Dong Jun of the Earth Defense Fleet, requesting immediate docking clearance for military consultation with the Galactic Council. Speaker Morthak activated his microphone. Admiral Dong Jun, permission granted. Dock at Military Berth 7. Acknowledged, came the reply. We'll be aboard in 30 minutes. Please have all relevant commanders and delegates present. We have a war to plan. The communication cut off, leaving the chamber in stunned silence. 30 minutes later, the main doors of the council chamber opened with a hiss. Admiral Dong Jun entered, followed by a dozen human officers. Han Wu had expected them to look like the peaceful diplomats and scientists that Earth usually sent. Instead, these humans looked like soldiers preparing for battle. Admiral Dong Jun was a tall, lean man with graying hair and cold eyes. He wore a uniform that Han Wu had never seen before, black with silver insignia and patches that meant nothing to him. The other officers looked equally professional and equally dangerous. Delegates of the Galactic Alliance, Admiral Dong Jun said without preamble, I am here to inform you that Earth is assuming military authority over the conflict with the Valorian Empire. Delegate Veltara's scales flashed red with alarm. Admiral, with respect, the Council has not authorized— The Council's authorization is not required, Admiral Dong Jun interrupted. 300 human citizens are being tortured and executed by an enemy that has declared war on civilian populations. Earth considers this an act of genocide. He activated a holographic display that showed the captured station where the human medical staff were being held. Our intelligence indicates that the Valorians have already executed 87 prisoners. 23 of them were human medical personnel. Dr. Mi Young gasped softly beside Han Wu. These were her colleagues, people she had worked with, people who had volunteered to help alien refugees. The Valorian Empire has made one critical mistake, Admiral Dong Jun continued. They have assumed that because we prefer peace, We are incapable of war. They are about to learn otherwise. One of the officers stepped forward and whispered something to the admiral. Dongjun nodded and turned back to the delegates. Colonel Jae-min will be leading the rescue operation, Admiral Dongjun announced. He specializes in hostage recovery and enemy elimination. Colonel Jae-min was a compact man with scarred hands and eyes that seemed to see everything. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but absolutely certain. The operation begins in 6 hours, he said. The Valorian forces at the captured station will be neutralized. All prisoners will be recovered. There will be no negotiations. Commander Kexathulans' scales had turned completely white. Colonel, the station is heavily defended. Our intelligence suggests it would take our entire remaining fleet to assault it successfully. Colonel Jae-min looked at the Saurian commander with something that might have been pity. Commander, you're thinking like someone who fights by galactic rules. We don't. What does that mean? Asked Delegate Quil Nth. Before anyone could answer, another officer approached Admiral Dongjun with a datapad. The admiral read it and nodded grimly. The Valorians have just broadcasted another execution, he announced. They killed 12 more prisoners, including 4 humans. The chamber fell silent. In that silence, Hanwoo saw something change in the faces of the human officers. It was subtle, but unmistakable. Whatever restraint they had been showing was gone. Colonel Jae-min, Admiral Dongjun said quietly, you are authorized to use any means necessary. Understood, sir, Colonel Jae-min replied. No survivors among enemy forces. Wait, Speaker Morthak called out. Surely you don't mean... I mean exactly what I said, Colonel Jae-min interrupted. The Valorians wanted to teach the galaxy a lesson about fear. We're going to teach them a lesson about what humans do to people who torture our friends. As the human officers filed out to prepare for their mission, Taeho called down from the gallery. Delegates, you might want to evacuate any ships or stations near the target area. When we fight without rules, we don't worry much about collateral damage. Admiral Dongjun paused at the chamber doors. The rescue operation is just the beginning. Earth has decided that the Valorian Empire represents a threat to civilized species everywhere. We will be removing that threat. Removing? Asked Delegate Veltara weakly. Admiral Dongjun's expression was stone cold. Completely. As the doors closed behind the human, 6 months had passed since the human fleet had arrived at Nexus Prime. 6 months since everything changed. Ambassador Hanwoo stood in the same council, chamber where aliens had once dismissed humanity as naturally peaceful. Now the atmosphere was completely different. The Valorian Empire no longer existed. It had taken exactly 47 minutes for Colonel Jae-min's forces to rescue all prisoners from the captured station. The Valorian defenders, who had spent generations conquering less militaristic species, discovered what it meant to face humans who had stopped following rules. The rescue operation had been surgical in its precision and terrifying in its efficiency. Human soldiers had moved through the station like ghosts, appearing wherever they were needed, eliminating threats with weapons the Valorians had never seen before. When it was over, all 712 prisoners had been recovered alive. 0 Valorian defenders had survived. But the rescue was just the beginning. Within days, human fleets had appeared at every major Valorian stronghold simultaneously. Not to negotiate or demand surrender, simply to deliver an ultimatum. Release all prisoners, cease all military operations, and surrender unconditionally or be destroyed. The Valorians had chosen to fight. They regretted that choice very quickly. Now Hanwoo sat across from Delegate Veltara in a private meeting room adjacent to the main chamber. The Saurian diplomat looked years older than she had 6 months ago. Her scales, once vibrant and confident, had faded to a dull gray. Ambassador Hanwoo, she said quietly, my government has asked me to discuss the future of galactic relations with your species. Of course, Hanwoo replied. What would you like to know? Veltara's scales shifted nervously. We need to understand what humanity expects from the galaxy now. Your military capabilities far exceed anything we imagined. Your technology, where did it come from? Hanwoo had been expecting this question for months. We've always had it, Delegate Veltara. We just chose not to use it. But you're peaceful. Space program, your diplomatic missions, your humanitarian efforts, all genuine, Hanwoo assured her. We really do prefer peace. We really do want to help other species, but we also prepared for the possibility that peace might not always be an option. The door chimed, and Dr. Mi Young entered the room. She now wore the uniform of the newly created Galactic Medical Ethics Council, an organization the humans had established after the war. Her job was to ensure that what happened to those prisoners never happened again to anyone. "How are the rehabilitation centers working?" Hanwoo asked her. "Better than expected," Mi Young replied, sitting down at the table. "The Valorian civilians we relocated are adapting well to their new worlds. The ones who were just following orders because they were afraid are actually grateful to be free of their empire's military culture." Veltara looked confused. "I don't understand. You destroyed their empire, but you're helping their people?" "We destroyed their military and their government," Hanwoo corrected. "The civilians were victims too. Most of them never chose to be part of a conquering empire. They were just born into it. But surely some of them still pose a threat?" Dr. Mi Young's expression darkened slightly. "The ones who actively participated in torture and execution, they were dealt with differently." Veltara did not ask for details. Everyone in the galaxy had heard rumors about what happened to Valorian war criminals. They simply disappeared, completely, as if they had never existed. The door chimed again, and Admiral Dongjun entered with Colonel Jae-min. Both men looked tired but satisfied. They had spent the last 6 months dismantling one of the galaxy's most aggressive empires with methodical precision. "Admiral," Hanwoo said, standing to greet them, "how did the final operations go?" "Clean completion," Admiral Dongjun reported. "The last Valorian military installation surrendered yesterday. All weapon stockpiles have been secured or destroyed. All prisoners of war have been released and returned to their home worlds." Colonel Jaemin added, "We've also finished establishing the new monitoring stations. If anyone tries to rebuild the Valorian military structure, we'll know immediately." Veltara's scales had turned almost white. "You're going to watch them permanently?" "We're going to watch everyone," Admiral Dongjun said matter-of-factly. "Not to control them, but to make sure nothing like the Valorian Empire ever happens again." "You can't monitor the entire galaxy?" Veltara protested. "Actually, we can," Colonel Jaemin replied. "We've been monitoring our own planet for decades to prevent wars. Expanding the system to cover the galaxy is just a matter of scale." The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. Humanity had not just defeated the Valorians. They had positioned themselves as the galaxy's permanent guardians. "What if other species object?" Veltara asked nervously. Admiral Dongjun's expression remained neutral. "Then they can explain why they object to preventing genocide and torture." Before anyone could respond, the chamber's main doors opened. Tae-ho entered, no longer wearing his simple gray jacket. Now he wore the uniform of a special military advisor, a position the council had created specifically for him. "How did the council session go?" Hanwoo asked. "Better than expected," Tae-ho replied, sitting down heavily. "Most species voted to accept the new security arrangements. The few who objected were persuaded by the historical evidence." Dr. Mi Young looked curious. "What historical evidence?" "We showed them detailed records of what the Valorians did to conquered populations," Tae-ho explained. "Pictures, videos, survivor testimonies. After seeing that, even the most independent species agreed that some threats require immediate elimination." Veltara leaned forward. "Elder Tae-ho, may I ask you something directly?" "Of course. Are humans planning to conquer the galaxy?" Tae-ho looked at her with tired eyes. "Delegate Veltara, if we wanted to conquer the galaxy, would we be sitting here having this conversation?" The question hung in the air unanswered. "We don't want to rule anyone," Tae-ho continued. "We want to make sure that civilized species can live in peace without fear of being tortured, enslaved, or exterminated." "But you have the power to rule," Veltara pressed. "Yes," Admiral Dongjun said simply. "We do. That's exactly why you can. Trust us not to abuse it." Colonel Jaemin added, "Species that need to conquer others to feel powerful are weak. We proved our strength by choosing restraint for centuries. We only removed that restraint when someone made it impossible to continue." Dr. Mi Young pulled out a datapad with statistics. "In the 6 months since the Valorian Empire fell, galactic violence has decreased by 93%. Trade has increased by 400%. Medical cooperation between species has reached unprecedented levels. Fear, Veltara said, quietly, is a powerful motivator. It's not fear, Hanwu corrected. It's certainty. Every species in the galaxy now knows that if they try to become the next Valorian Empire, they will be stopped, quickly and permanently. Tejo stood up, slowly, his age showing in his movements. The galaxy spent thousands of years accepting that some species would always prey on others. You treated it as natural law. We treated it as a problem that needed solving. And now it's solved, Admiral Dongjun added. The room was quiet for several minutes as everyone absorbed the new reality. The galaxy was safer than it had ever been, but that safety came with the knowledge that humanity was watching everything. What happens now? Veltara asked finally. Now we go back to what we were doing before, Hanwu said. Diplomacy, trade, scientific cooperation, medical assistance. The only difference is that everyone can do it without worrying about being conquered and tortured. Dr. Mi-young smiled for the first time in months. I've already received requests from 17 species for medical exchange programs. They want to learn human trauma treatment techniques. And we've had 43 worlds request defensive partnerships, Colonel Jamin added. They want to make sure they're on the right side if another threat ever emerges. Tejo moved toward the door, then paused. Delegate Veltara, you asked what humans expect from the galaxy. We expect exactly what we've always expected. To be left alone to live in peace. The difference is that now we've made sure everyone else can expect the same thing. As the meeting ended and the participants prepared to leave, Veltara approached Hanwu one final time. Ambassador, may I ask you something personal? Of course. Are you proud of what your species did? Hanwu considered the question carefully. I'm proud that we stopped a genocide. I'm proud that we saved innocent lives. I'm proud that we made the galaxy safer for everyone. He paused, looking out the chamber's windows at the stars beyond. But I'm not proud that it was necessary. I wish the Valorians had chosen differently. I wish we could have found another way. And if another threat like them emerges? Hanwu's expression hardened slightly. Then we'll do what needs to be done. Again. As Veltara left the chamber, she understood that the galaxy had fundamentally changed. Humanity had not conquered them through force or fear. They had conquered them through competence. They had proven that they could end any threat, protect any ally, and enforce any peace. But more importantly, they had proven that they would only use that power when absolutely necessary. The galaxy was no longer a place where the strong preyed on the weak. It was a place